Dark spruce forests frowned on either side of the frozen waterway. The trees had been stripped by a recent wind of their white covering of frost, and they seemed to lean towards each other, black and ominous in the fading light. A vast silence reigned over the land. The land itself was a desolation, lifeless, without movement, so lone and cold that the spirit of it was not that of sadness. There was a hint of it of laughter, but a laughter more terrible than any sadness, a laughter that was mirthless as the smile of the Sphinx, a laughter cold as the frost and partaking of the grimness of infallibility. It was the masterful and incommunicable wisdom of eternity, laughing at the futility of life and the effort of life. It was the wild, the savage, frozen-hearted Northland wild. No other introduction can better describe The Long Dark, a game that captures the poetic irony in American realism fiction as well as the terror from non-fictional accounts into the wild. Survival games are no stranger to set players against the environment, yet few can capture that primordial drive against a faceless entity that may appear to want you dead when it truly holds no interest for you. The Long Dark further ties into that fundamental longing for man to see that wilderness as if it were the last untamed frontier beyond the facade of modernity. Learning from that struggle, of accepting things beyond your control and recognizing the drive to keep going, is what is at the heart of The Long Dark. To describe this game in another way, if Firewatch used the wilderness as a stage for the narrative, then The Long Dark uses its hinterlands mechanics to tell your story in the wild. Everything from the game's complexity, the numerous probabilities, the nuances of its health systems, as well as the unpredictability of its sandbox, results in players learning to coexist with these forces of life and death out of respect for what is beyond their control. Survival isn't a victory state or the accumulation of resources. It's the continuation to see what comes the next day, for the wilderness is the most paternal figure known to man. It can provide in times of plenty, and it can destroy you if you fail to heed its warnings. A bond that can only be maintained if it is reciprocated. Before we delve into how The Long Dark evokes such strong emotions, we must first scale the seemingly insurmountable heights of finding one's footing in these lands. Like hiking through a mountain, there are different routes of various skill levels to teach similar lessons, some with harsher winds and others with new obstacles. However, it is arguable which one is intended as the beginner's ropes, so the choice is left for your discretion and your willingness to learn from your errors. The Long Dark features two distinct modes to train players from their failures to eventually become another occupant in the quiet apocalypse. These modes include the Wintermute story mode, featuring 2 complete episodes out of the 5 planned. The other is the choice between a free-roaming sandbox with no objective but to survive, or with conditional challenges that can take anywhere from under an hour to 5 hours, meant for the most dedicated. Regardless whatever mode you choose, the map layouts are almost identical, except for variables that alter every new run, such as habitable houses, specific item locations, and the overall scarcity decided by the difficulty setting. As a result, traversing this world strikes a tough yet fair balance, where its permanency and its changes demand players value knowing their surroundings. Although the Wintermute prologue helps explain essential concepts as well as refresh returning players with the updated UI, the ideal experience would be to play the sandbox mode on the Pilgrim setting. In addition, the free-form sandbox is the only mode of the 3 with any metagame progressions and reward systems. For added immersion, you may also wish to download fan-made maps that provide only the layouts of areas without spoilers. You could use the in-game charcoal system, yet it becomes tedious over several deaths. Wintermute's 2 episodes greatly suffer from imposing scripted mistakes, such as encountering wolves rather than providing situations where players create their own demise. The difference may not seem important, and you may argue tutorials are a necessary evil, yet the latter method creates lasting memories with far more personality. The approach is reminiscent to Jack London's short story, To Build a Fire, where problems escalated from minor issues such as getting clothes wet to becoming fatal due to the protagonist's arrogance and his inability to build a fire. How much importance you value your mistakes can make all the difference between living for the moment or living until the next mistake. Without investing enough time, the difficulty options may appear indistinguishable to players who find the game as one big sink or swim common to other challenging games. In addition to these settings, each starting location offers a quick synopsis detailing not only the area's difficulty level, but also general information about distinct hazards such as thin ice or sudden changes in weather. Wherever you choose to begin your adventure, choosing to play on Pilgrim removes many stressful elements that would otherwise make the game tedious for advanced players, such as animals not attacking you or the abundance of items. This mode is meant to introduce players with every major and minor system, from the minimalistic UI, the robust vitality system, and the hundreds of other little details accrued from direct experience. However, these difficulty settings can be briefly summarized as such. Pilgrim as the starry-eyed Christopher McCandless, Voyeur as Joe Krakauer this area deadbeat, Stalker as you're in a Jack London novel, and Interloper, do bears shit in the woods? You'll find out. Custom difficulty is also an option to tailor the game to your liking, from various weather options, starting bonuses, animal spawn rates and behaviors, and dozens of other little tweaks. Whether you want to focus solely on surviving against the weather, or to become as much of a predator as prey with the food chain, these options allow players to create as lax or as haphazard of a journey. Perhaps to affirm the disclaimer that The Long Dark is not meant to mirror real life, it is ironic how the higher you raise the difficulty, the more the game becomes like fiction. It is only on the Pilgrim mode do most predators, especially wolves, behave realistically, where invading their territory results in them becoming violent. In most situations on Pilgrim, wolves will come out to investigate before turning tail without a pack unless you further escalate with them to lash out. Any misguided idea that The Long Dark is trying to be realistic should be discarded as much as American realism described reality with the written word. Similar to the game's impressionist art style that turns every shadow into a perceived threat, the gameplay's intentions are to emulate what people assume it means to survive. All inconveniences are gamified or they are laid on the wayside, as The Long Dark trims off as many uninteresting details as it can, while retaining all the important ones, as it is a simulation first and foremost, meant to imitate what people think of the wilderness.
Third of Boxcar midnight train, destination Bangor, Maine. Old worn-out suit and shoes. I don't pay no union dues. I smoke old stogies I have found. Short but not too big around. I'm a man of means by no means. King of the road. King of the road.
Survival, as the word and the genre suggests, attempts to strip all the complex social variables of life into the core biological drive to continue against the odds. As a medium built on experiencing conflict and known for failure states, video games provide greater connections from necessary yet mundane tasks compared to reading or watching stories about a close call with death. However, this style of game is also predisposed with the same binary logic of winning and failing towards all aspects of life, which removes any spontaneous interplay of smaller unintended consequences between the player and the environment. Many games within this genre fall victim to their homogenized approach towards player interactions, severely limiting any possibility for the gameplay to create unforeseen situations that tell a far more complicated tale from the player's perspective. While The Long Dark is not immune to these flaws, it improves upon the foundation of commonly accepted survival mechanics by implementing them with more nuance and from multiple sources. The clearest case is the separation of the health meter between the player's overall condition and his or her needs. Condition is the player's overall vitality before death. Needs are broken up into 4 categories: warmth, fatigue, hunger, and thirst. And each category has 5 stages of deterioration that will only slowly affect condition in their final stages. Each of these needs comes with their own meters that influence chance-based afflictions and provide tangible effects on the player's controls, such as sprinting, holding weapons, or resisting animal attacks. The importance of each need varies with their decay rate, as it takes 4 in-game days to die from hunger, whereas it takes 2 days to die from thirst. In short, it takes a reasonable amount of time to perish, and restoring these needs also replenish his condition, but only after enough time awake or with enough rest, or with the rare item Emergency Stim Packs. This one system is but a component to the larger mechanical ecosystem that also includes recipes, perishable goods and tools, as well as natural wildlife and renewable resources. Every facet of this game provides tangible choices you can and you will have to make if you wish to survive, and it's that richness that creates all its stories to reminisce around the campfire. This interplay is also present with the Long Dart's other abstract mechanics, from its combat or lack thereof, as well as various skills players can improve with practice. Combat is hard to explain without first-hand experience, yet the simplest way to describe it is The Long Dark is a first-person survival game, not a first-person shooter. Range combat exists with rocks, a bow, and a rifle, and their handling can be difficult compared to most first-person shooters. Yet melee combat is a quick-time event where without any weapons, your odds of success of fighting a bear with your bare hands goes about as well as you would expect. This decision was probably made to prevent players from treating this game like Skyrim, where you could paddle wolves away with any twig you would find, yet the current system makes it impossible to avoid taking damage when engaging them. Also, if you lack any tools, then the QTE becomes an exercise of frustration if you prefer using a mouse over a controller, and with recording software this sequence can be more taxing than it should be. This is the only area of the gameplay where, despite understanding why the decision was made, it is remarkably poorly implemented. Outside of combat mechanics, the other major component is the survival skills, broken up between combat and foraging. Combat skills include firearms and archery, along with their maintenance, cleaning, repairing, and sharpening, whereas foraging includes harvesting, cooking, fire starting, ice fishing, and mending clothing. Cooking is the only skill that has received a major overhaul where you can now cook items independently from you, which when cooking food outside and searching for more kindling, it adds another risk-reward system as food can attract predators. Every skill can be increased through practice or by reading instruction manuals, and none of these skills are more tangible than statistical influences. However, no skill feels worthless unless you lack its respective item. These skills only serve to provide added tension when watching progress meters slowly complete in failure or success. Perhaps this lackluster approach explains why there are no character builds for the survival mode when archetypes with unique obstacles could encourage replayability. The feature wouldn't have to be too excessive, as it could be interesting to play as a vegan with more metabolism from eating plants over animals, as well as suffering an aim penalty with weapons, or as a clumsy oaf who can open metal doors with raw strength, yet he or she cannot build a fire, or even playing with illnesses like diabetes or anxiety where you could manage the affliction. Given the current system, these builds wouldn't be very engaging without a massive overhaul, yet if Hinterland Studio wants to expand these systems, this area would be fertile enough to be worth paying for the extra effort. Hold on, am I really asking for disease disability lock content? What a strange world we live in the year of 2018. All of these aspects we've discussed are mainly within the player's control, whereas the outside forces are what compel players to make sudden poor or smart decisions. Weather plays a prominent role as snowstorms, heavy winds, or dense fog can provide additional obstacles, often without any warning. Auroras are another weather phenomenon, yet I will talk about it when discussing the Wintermute episodes. In addition to these sudden changes, players can also opt into the world decay rates or ever-increasing temperatures to increase the cold shoulder from Mother Nature. Aside from the harsh winds, the wildlife features two predators, wolves and bears, which have their own locations and their own behaviors to make them distinct threats. Although all these adversaries can be quick and lethal, there are visual and audio cues subtle enough for expert players to identify. For example, crows flying in a circle indicates there is a corpse, and when the crows fly directly over the player, it indicates there is an incoming change in weather. Howling, barks, rushing winds, snapping twigs, these heightened cues create moment-to-moment tension any survival horror game would kill to have, and it further cements how experience over time is the greatest mentor in these wild lands. However you choose to play, unless you are playing beyond Voyeur, The Long Dark never requires an optimal path to last hundreds of days. If you play carefully, you will probably find it was your boredom that led to your own demise. Whatever the length of your journey, your progression will likely be the same, as you will eventually use up all civilized goods to where you will have to subsist off the land. Backpacking across the Great Bear can only get you so far, yet you will become attuned to the interconnected routes such as the dam in Mystery Lake to the Pleasant Valley. You may also become aware of random goods washing up along the coastal shoreline while ice fishing, as well as keeping in mind locations for natural resources like cattails for easy meals. Biology will eventually erode any moral apprehensions to fend for your survival, as you will resort to your gun for hunting, then crafting a bow and arrows when that rifle is gone, or testing your luck throwing stones. At that point, you will find yourself no different from your prehistoric ancestors. The transition between those extremes will vary depending on the player's dispositions, yet the outcome, if one wishes to survive that long, will end the same. Unfortunately, as interesting as it could be to experience that evolutionary regression, it's difficult to say the journey is worth its time. Repetition doesn't bother me if there is a goal to work towards, and this is where the survival mode comes up short. It's only the conditional challenge mode that offers any finality that isn't death. After the 50th day, exploring all the regions and climbing up to the top of Timberwolf Mountain, you have essentially reached the summit of all you can strive for when there is nowhere else to go. This reason is perhaps, in spite of its numerous shortcomings, the Wintermute mode is what I would rather complete, as it provides enough structure as well as open-endedness from the sandbox with a clear beginning, middle, and end. In contrast to the stories generated by the Long Dark sandbox, Wintermute attempts to share the same storytelling experience with open-ended, yet linear series of quests that resemble the challenge mode. Some people may be too quick to call the design uninspired, perhaps by the arbitrary nature of its trust system, when the narrative's strongest point comes not from its plots but from its journey. Even the creators who recently posted an update about Episode's 3 release stated back in February that they wanted the first 2 episodes to be an introduction for more non-linear content, which would be logical for a game released from early access. As a result from community feedback, not only will the 3rd episode be drastically different, but also the first 2 episodes will be redone to make the content more optional. With so many drastic changes, critiquing these episodes now holds little, if any, value for the future, especially in terms of its gameplay shortcomings. Yet its campaign structure, its narrative framework, and its effectiveness of telling that story remain open for discussion. Besides the scripted failures as I previously mentioned, the only offensive gameplay element that I hope is improved is the saving system. Autosaves can be exploited at any time, and the game currently offers the ability to save anywhere with no limitations. You might argue that a campaign mode should be more than willing to let players exploit systems for their benefit, yet one only need look at the survival horror genre to see how the Long Dark could take a page from their books. The simplest solution would be to implement autosaves whenever people are mauled by animals, as well as create in-game items similar to Resident Evil's ink ribbons that allow save states in specific locations. Essentially, this is what the autosave system already provides, but in a more controlled manner. This system would not only allow players to restore progress if they get stuck, but it would also provide incentive to branch off the main route for additional rewards and opportunities to generate more player-driven stories. Speaking about the narrative, the overall storytelling is about what I had expected from a game that was primarily developed to be about survival, and yet it also manages to go against my expectations. Melodramatic exchanges are meant to explore personal histories and the backstory about the world and its characters, which provides some life to what was previously a barren landscape with its own beauty. Characters often talk in their own soliloquies that while these exchanges can be entertaining, it can also be distracting to the game's immersion. Although these moments can be more ham-fisted than rummaging into a pig's carcass, if the storytelling suffers any objective flaws, its themes come across too heavy-handed, and the mysterious nature of the game can border on the absurd.
Will, I didn't come here to fight about the past. I need a pilot to take me somewhere remote. Someone who won't ask too many questions. Someone I can trust.
Wait, questions? Astrid, are you in trouble?
Are you gonna help me, or not?
What's in the case?
See, there's that thing about no questions, remember?
What's in the case, Astrid?
No questions.
Look, the weather out there is bad. Bad. But it's getting worse. You walk in here after years. I could have been dead. You could have been. And then you show up and you want me to just risk my life flying into the middle of the great northern nowhere to deliver you in some mystery metal case to some remote wilderness outpost. All because you walked in here and asked me to?
Yes.
Where the survival mode emulates realism fiction, which usually provides some commentary about the boundaries between the wilderness and the comforts of modern society such as White Fang or The Call of the Wild, Wintermute has more in common with Jack London's sci-fi work such as The Red One, a story about some extraterrestrial phenomenon out in the middle of nowhere. It is this aspect that most players seem divisive towards, as the Auroras introduce more fantastical elements to a game built on its realistic portrayal of the wild. Auroras are the strangest gameplay element added with Wintermute's release, although it can be turned on or off for the sandbox. These nights result in electronics becoming functional as well as casting a green glow around predators with more aggressive behavior, and the only means to keep them away involve using your rechargeable flashlight, staying in the light, or by killing them. The chances of an Aurora are completely unknown, as it may happen one evening in one location, and it may happen in the next area a fortnight afterwards. This feature is only required to finish the second episode to get through the dam, but otherwise it only makes nightly traversals more interesting. As jarring as its inclusion, it's also amusing to realize that all along these Halloween updates were planned for the future. What made this mechanic interesting was how it provided me a 12-day-long rite of passage of living off the land, praying against the odds that the doorway would open before my last bullet. This was a similar sense of accomplishment after reaching the top of Timberwolf Mountain for the very first time, where players can feast for days, possibly weeks, in the remains of a crashed aircraft. In these brief moments of order, one could call these places home, and it was the closest I ever came to finding paradise, as well as becoming lulled by the purgatory of these small comforts, before being reminded of the ever-encroaching frozen circle of hell of tomorrow. Although the story mode is not complete, and it may change for the better or for the worse, it would be impossible not to appreciate what experience you will find here. Even at its most mundane moments where you are simply patching clothing in the dark of a cabinet to pass the time, listening to the howling winds and fading cries in the distance, the silence can feel just as paced and just as tense as any action when you walk out those doors. As someone who doesn't enjoy most survival games as they are unfinished early access products, simplified and overpromising any true potential, The Long Dark is a soothing balm toward my cynicism, and it is proof that this genre can become something more than another joke of a popular trend. Spending one more night trapped under the stars of the Great Bear and all its hauntingly lifeless beauty of a wasteland is all the reason I need to spend another day in its adventure that is called life.